you're back to talk about some good news, which is always welcome here when we're covering politics from the left. Last time we spoke with a lot of optimism after the center-left candidate Bernardo Arevalo, whose party is the Semilla Party, came in second place, surprisingly so, in the first round against Torres, and who was the right-wing candidate, and that was in June. Now, as of this weekend, Arevalo has won the presidential election in decisive fashion, I should say. Talk about this incredible moment.
Thanks. Yeah, this is a moment that Guatemala has not experienced in 80 years, 90 years since the last time Guatemala had news like this, when people woke up the next morning, was the election of Juan José Arevalo. That is to say, Bernardo Arevalo's father, way back in 1944. So this has been a long time coming. And you can see you can see the way people reacted to this on the streets of Guatemala. Spontaneous, upsurge of emotionality, of hope, of happiness, of drumming and pots banging and bubucelas, horns, ringing all through the country, not just in Guatemala City, all through the country. It was an exceptional turnout, a landslide victory for Bernardo Arevalo, the candidate nobody saw coming. The candidate came out of left field and won the elections and defeated the candidate of the party called UNE, who had been running for the third time and lost 37% to 58%, 1.2 million votes against nearly 1.7 million votes for Bernardo Arevalo. Something remarkable has happened in the country, and people know it. People feel it. It's like I said, a long time coming. So no wonder people refer to this as the dawn of a new spring.
You said, for the first time in 80 years, this is this kind of seismic shift since the election of the first democratically elected president of Guatemala, the father of the current incoming president Arevalo. And we mentioned this the last time we spoke, but Arevalo Sr.'s successor, Arbenz, was the one who was ousted in the infamous CIA-backed coup in the 50s. And how vivid is that history, the last name Arevalo, as well, for Guatemalans when they are going to the polls?
When Guatemalans think back to the 1944-1954 October Revolution, as it's also known in the country, they tend to think of both Arevalo and Arbenz almost in the same breath, almost in the same thought. They don't really think only Arevalo or only Arbenz. The two of them are like inextricably linked by historical experience. So the coup in 1954, therefore, doesn't feel to Guatemalans like a coup just against Arbenz. It also feels like a coup against Arevalo and Arevalo's legacy. So the coup left a kind of a traumatic experience in the memory of Guatemalans. Guatemalans have been carrying this for a very, very long time. And what's interesting about the elections in 2023 is the extent to which a lot of people didn't take this into account. A lot of people just did not think about the importance of this legacy in the memory of many Guatemalans, not only urban Guatemalans, also rural Guatemalans. And you could see this in Bernardo Arevalo's political campaign. He went to many towns in the country. And as he himself has said, many of these places he visited, he encountered people who went out on the streets to greet him, or he went into their homes. And what they showed him were pictures of his father or pictures of Jacobo Arbenz, remembering, the experience of the 44-54 revolution, essentially saying to him, and the signs said it themselves, we've been waiting for this for 70 years. So this is a factor that was not taken into account. The importance of that experience.
Who did not take it into account? I'm sorry to cut you off, Marco, but who do you think, was kind of so arrogant to assume that this would not be still in the minds of
the right-wing
people?
political parties that have been in power, not only since 2016, 2015, but in fact since 1954. So right-wing political parties thought this legacy had been stamped out. Not really. Not really. Organizations that have been campaigning ceaselessly on an anti-communist kind of discourse in Guatemala, like the Foundation Against Terrorism, an extreme right-wing outlet dedicated to the persecution and harassment of judges and lawyers and so on who are engaged in what we know as transitional justice, bringing people accused of human rights violations to justice. These people like the Foundation Against Terrorism, right-wing political parties, but also the ruling economic elites of CACIF, they thought that this sort of experiences 80, 70 years ago were really no longer relevant for Guatemalans. They were sorely mistaken. And not only were they relevant now, they were relevant in 2015 as well, with the big, huge citizen uprisings that took place in the country that are, in fact, the foundation of this election.
Can you expand a little bit more on the persecution of lawyers, judges, people who are being targeted with imprisonment in recent years, and how that contributed to the climate as well?
Yes. Since the ousting of the United Nations Commission Against Impunity in Guatemala, known as CICIG, CICIG, in 2018, something that was done by President Jimmy Morales. Since the ousting of the CICIG Commission in Guatemala, the commission that had been working in the country for about 10 years, and it was charged with the investigation into clandestine bodies, present throughout different levels of the Guatemalan government and state in various forms, intelligence bodies, political bodies, political campaign finance bodies, you name it. The CICIG Commission was investigating this sort of things. They published earth-shaking reports in 2015, essentially revealing the links between political campaign and Guatemalan economic elites, the economic elites of CACIF. That's the most important corporate group in Guatemala. And together with CICIG, you then had also a number of very important people in Guatemala, like the chief of the public ministry at the time, Telma Aldana, for example. And you also have the special prosecutor against corruption in Guatemala, the then chief of the FECI, the FECI, the Fiscalía Especial contra la Impunidad, the special prosecutor against impunity. The chief of that is Juan Francisco Alfaro. You had people like Aldana, Alfaro, and then you have other prosecutors working with FECI, prosecutors in the city of Quetzaltenango, for example, like Virginia La Parra, who is right now languishing in jail. And together with them, you also had a number of incredibly courageous, judges in Guatemala who were presiding over some of the trials brought before them by the special prosecutors of FECI under Juan Francisco Alfaro. Judges, very important, like Judge Galvez, for example, judges that are now, in exile. About 20 lawyers and judges and special prosecutors, including Telma Aldana, Juan Francisco Alfaro, Judge Galvez, and so on. They're all now in exile in Washington and other places. And the reason for that is because since the arrival into the public ministry of the current chief of the public ministry, Consuelo Porras, which was appointed by Jimmy Morales, and then confirmed again for a second term in 2018 by President Yamatei, Consuelo Porras has essentially been wielding the power of the public ministry against those people dedicated to the prosecution of corruption. And among those people dedicated, among the people that are being prosecuted are people like Alejandro Sinibaldi, people that are highly corrupt, identified with the public finance of both the FSN Nación Party of Jimmy Morales and the Vamos Party of President Yamatei, the outgoing president right now. So the prosecution of all these people has resulted in the essentially the exile of lawyers and judges and prosecutors and so on.